Я приветствую вас, дорогие друзья.
Hello, dear friends, guests, and subscribers of my channel, and of course Alexei's channel as well. We are streaming live. It is 9 p.m. in Kyiv, 10 p.m. in Moscow, and glad to see you with us, Alexei. We will, of course, talk about Geneva, and I'm starting to estimate the time in Geneva, but I don't think they're in my time zone. I think Geneva actually overwhelmed a lot of expectations, although it was organized somewhat haphazardly, and we will talk about the echoes of this meeting in different aspects today. The format of our stream, however, is unchangeable, so pay attention first, please, to the QR codes at the bottom. That's where you can ask questions that we will address at the end of the stream, and you can leave a question in advance so we can address it in the next segment. And of course, to make sure our communication is more entertaining, here is the usual question for our listeners. It sounds like this: if we are to conclude this war hypothetically today, like right now, and the war and resistance and everything, and then please conclude the sentence, will leave Ukraine, will return to Ukraine, will stay in place and will be happy, or will stay in place and will be very upset, and will be mourning the fallen or the results. Alexei, how will you answer this question? I would probably stay first in the place where I am right now and observe what will happen after. And what would be your mood like in this case? I'll be both happy and sad, glad that the war is over and sad that so many people have perished. All right, friends, do not forget to vote. It's very curious for us to see what is your choice. And perhaps let's start with the main question. Ukrainians are now separated, split, asking each other questions whether they support or not support Trump's plan. And it's somewhat a hot bun right now in the media. And we do have an interesting point approaching the stream that out of 28 original points, we have only 19 left. And message from presidential office comes saying that, look, we diminished the number of points. No, there will not be a blanket amnesty. There'll be, of course, attempts to help people who have suffered, and those who are responsible, they will have to somewhat pay for that. So what do you think about that? What do you think about this meeting? Do you think that work to perhaps interrupt the process succeeded? Oh, you mean interruption of what? Oh, interruption that Ukraine was trying to break the agreement and doing their best to make it not happen or not digestible for Russia? Listen, the saddest part about this event is the pen that Umerov broke while signing it. And together with the broken pen, we are observing the broken expectations that the war would be over soon, that Putin would somehow also, another thing that's not happening is that Putin will somehow accept Ukrainian favoring plan. And of course, the point that this war will likely not conclude quickly. In the nearest term, we probably will expect Trump to implement sanctions against Putin. That is his model. And his sanctions and his push on Russia will be stronger and sterner than on Ukraine. And then they'll be rolled out somewhat agreed upon plan by both sides. Now he understands, I think, rather well whom is he dealing with in both Ukraine and in Russia. That's why he's using some arguments to convince both sides. That's why in Ukraine he's using NABU service to attack corruption, and on Russian side Americans are using extra pressure with sanctions. And there'll be some certain track that will be developed, in my view, that the process will follow to come to some agreement. This track will not automatically include all the points of this agreement. There'll be some motions back and forth. There likely will be more exchange of everybody for everybody. There might be a Christmas or New Year peace treaty, or at least stoppage of this war for the holidays. And in some fashion, this process will continue moving forward with communication and pushbacks from both sides. There will be, of course, progress. As for finishing of this war, the actual date when it will happen, I'm not too optimistic, and let me not be wrong. I would not give you a date right now. And by the way, here is the picture of a broken pen by Umerov. So we might want to move to a different level of discussion about Xi Jinping and Trump and other things, but I cannot just miss this photo. This view, both the way Yermak and Umerov were looking after this meeting, they were both looking very guilty and very dissatisfied, and now there's also that picture of this broken pen surfacing. Well, first of all, Alexander, there was a news that Umerov is the next figure of NABU anti-corruption work. Then evil tongues are saying that Umerov actually did go to the United States for a day and a half between leaving Ukraine and going to Istanbul. And I understand that all these 36 hours he was probably very busy giving data to FBI. So the question is, why would he break a pen? Because he probably is cooperating with the prosecution already, and you need to legalize his statements to FBI, so he needs to sign certain things. Otherwise, it's just a conversation. So he should have been at peace. He should have probably agreed to everything with FBI. So I don't know what exactly was the reason for him to break the pen. Perhaps something surfaced that he did not expect to surface. There are some rumors that there was a scandal during the conversation, during the negotiations in Istanbul. What's the subject of a scandal? I understand the articles. Well, how do you scandal with those who give you 85% of your money and weapons? You're incorrigible, you're dirty, rotten scoundrels, and then they do what? They tell you, well, okay, then we don't give you any money or any more weapons from now on. Is that the way to scandal? So I'm not exactly sure why did he break this pen. There are other publications, Alexei, now, all of them targeting that Zelensky probably shouldn't be visiting Washington and the White House, and indicating that the plan to sign this agreement in the presence of Trump is somewhat postponed. And in Geneva, there were mentions that there'll be more discussions at the meetings between Trump and Zelensky. What other results are they waiting? What is not enough from Geneva? Why did they go, and what did they achieve? Well, we should face the facts, Alexander, that we exactly don't know what they achieved in Geneva. We only are aware of what the press is publishing. How much is it in agreement with actually what happened, what we hear from the press? Probably to some degree it's realistic. It's true. But will everything change based on this meeting? No. It's the same thing as Istanbul in March of 22nd. Same questions, territorial question, proportion of armed forces. Nothing changes. And the logic of our struggle with Russia is the same. It remains the same. So you can call it Istanbul, you can call it Geneva. This will all go back and gravitate back to Istanbul, as I see. Putin needs a symbolic victory in Istanbul because one of the main, if not the main argument of the post-war Russia that he would need for both internally and for external consumption, he would be highlighting, saying that, look, everything could have been concluded back in 2022, but Ukraine and the West have chosen to continue fighting, so all the victims and all the damage and destruction since March of 22 is totally upon them. Now, in order for Istanbul meeting to happen, both sides will have to go over certain concessions, and I'm sure there are bluffs on both sides are already fighting. Russian side is already saying that Ukraine will soon crack apart. Ukraine is already saying that and will state even more that Russia will fall apart as well if they continue fighting economically. And to some degree, both sides are true, both sides are correct. To the degree that they are wrong, nobody is truly aware. And I wrote an interesting post today when Washington Post published that Trump is not aware of what Ukraine and Russia have agreed upon in Geneva, that Trump is not aware of all the entirety of these articles. I noted that, don't worry, nobody really knows the contents of these articles. So this is somewhat reminiscent of a dance with some unexpected and awkward moves. And this is how this event is being reviewed in the international media. The pen was broken. They have almost quarreled. So what is it? Yeah. Have they brought flowers? Have they not brought flowers? What kind of wicked comedy is that? They're just feeding people with zero results. The media is inventing. But I'm aware for sure that it will end up in Istanbul with some minor details, but essentially it will end in the same core of agreement that we have agreed upon back in 22. So I think, Alexei, one can pay attention to the speed of Trump's push towards negotiations, towards resolution of this conflict. There is a Ministry of War in the United States who is visiting in person. Axios actually published interesting materials about this plan. So I have a question in this regard. Why United States? Everybody is screaming to them, Russia, Europe, Ukraine. They're screaming at the United States, don't push your horses, hold your horses. And the United States continue pushing and pressing. And many people are upset because they think that this may cause a less favorable position for Ukraine. Trump has two main arguments. First is midterm elections to Congress, especially given that in New York, the Republicans suffered a significant ideological failure with Mamdani election. Second, they have a certain position with China, and they need to exchange things with China and the Middle East. So this is part of a bigger picture that he wants to achieve events in Ukraine as well. And why did the so-called vicious American delegation visit Ukraine? It was divided into two parts. The first one was smiling and was showing maps and charts. And I don't know who showed it to them, but Zelensky previously was feeding the United States with the data that Russians will start to retreat just the day after tomorrow. Everything is so horrible on the front and everything is so gloomy that today or tomorrow we'll go into counteroffensive and we'll kick Russians out of Ukraine, as Napoleon back in the day. And the first part of American delegation was actually showing that this is not exactly true. They brought numbers, cards, and charts. The second part was more interesting. They said, oh, Vladimir, it's somewhat uncomfortable. The weapons that we supplied to you is now being discovered in Africa, or is being discovered in Hezbollah possession, or in discovered with drug cartels of Central and South America. How come? How did that happen? So all that made Zelensky and his team to change their position, be more shy, and perhaps break the pen. So about the weapons, there was a huge scandal with Moldova, with Romanians and Moldovans, that the arms were shipped in rather significant quantities. And again, this is all on the level of rumors because the subject is being forcefully attempted to be erased from the media. On the border of Romania and Moldova, a big truck load was discovered that was supposedly heading towards Israel with anti-tank missiles, 18 at count, 8 grenade launchers, cornets, and a bunch of other things. So significant assortment of Russians Russian arms. So supposedly going through Moldova, something should have happened in EU. There should have been another 11th of September that would have shuffled the cards. But apparently now they're trying to erase this event from ever occurring. You, as the intelligence officer, what can you say about these versions and data that we're getting about this shipment? Is it coincidence? I don't think so. I don't think so, Alexander. Right? One would think, why would Ukraine be involved in this picture? In Romanian border, somewhat shipped from Moldova, Russian arms are being sent somewhere towards Israel. Why would that upset the Ukrainian picture? Let's count the number of countries bordering with Moldova. There are two: Romania and Ukraine. So one version is that Moldova somehow shipped these weapons to Romania and then, sorry, the other way. The Romania shipped them to Moldova and then from Moldova to Romania they were caught, or Ukraine supplied these weapons. So if Ukrainians are somehow, perhaps, right, if Russia shipped these weapons, maybe they are conducting some special operation or planning to organize another September in Europe, or October-like event in Europe, and they somehow have smuggled it through Ukraine. So one can start asking questions, why would Russia do that? And how would they do that? And why Ukraine did not catch them? Now, in order to develop an event in Europe, why would you send it through Romanian and Moldovan border? It should not have arrived to Romanian port. It should have traveled to some Germany or some other place. So Russian trace is not really, it's hard to glue it, to pin it to this strategy. Well, it's a very dangerous moment now for provocations of any kind, I think. Alexander, you think this is a Russian provocation? No, I think something has to happen that everybody would point fingers at Russia and would say that, listen, no negotiations, no plans, get out, to hell with you and your house. No. Everything, Alexander, is more simple, I think. And it probably dead ends in that second part of the conversation of American delegation with our highest person in Ukraine, that Ukrainian arms are going somewhere, or American supplied arms are going somewhere from Ukraine. Okay, Alexei, I think everybody is somewhat fed up with this topic, but we still need to talk about them in this stream, and I want to discuss the continuation of the story. Everybody read those 28 points of this plan. Now they're magically dwindled down to 19. We're not reading 19. We don't know which one of them survived to that shorter edition, and we only believe Kislitsyn and Ukraine side, who are saying that we have altered the articles, but nobody knows nothing. So the publications that we see, they're somewhat different. European publications. And here's to see the difference. This is the comparative table that you can already find online. We can discuss it in pieces. So territories. What was in the plan? That controlled by Ukraine armies, part of Donbass will get a status of neutral demilitarized territory of Russia, and borderline in Kherson and Zaporizhia districts will go on the front line. Reported rumored new version is that Ukraine refuses to bring military lost territories they lost during this war in a military fashion, and territorial matters will be resolved by the current front line. The numbers of Ukraine armed forces, initial was 600,000 or less, current not more than 800,000. NATO membership for Ukraine, original was refusal of Ukraine to not be in this part of alliance. Altered version, this will depend upon the consensus of NATO members, which is not in existence. The promise of Russia to not intrude in the neighbor countries and NATO to expand. The article existed. It doesn't exist in the supposedly 19 article version. And the last item was that all negotiations will be done through United States. And in the altered version, the mention of United States is removed. Okay, Alexander, so the mention of these articles in this fashion, it causes me to somewhat stutter in the geopolitical fashion. Why is that you cannot set binding rules for both sides if you cannot realize a specific kind of pressure for not executing these articles? Okay, United States may exert certain pressure, but what about EU? How EU will enforce these articles? Because if you look at this modified vector, you can tell that it diminishes the role of the United States and increases the role of Europe, and basically saying that nobody will dictate us the change in the founding documents for EU, such as NATO alliance. And the United States under Trump are eager to take certain responsibilities on themselves. So it's understandable. Europeans are trying to defend their zone of influence and defend the way they create a world order in Europe. They don't want that to shake. They don't want it to change. Their position is, don't get in. America, get out. We don't want you in to such degree as you want to. And how are they going to help support that? Because they don't have resources that the United States have. And let's continue. There's more changes in this table. So originally, Russia was supposed to be returned to the world economy. In the altered version, it'll take time, it'll take stages, and it'll not be immediate. So there are no exact time frame. Now, there was also an article about $100 billion worth of Russian money that were arrested in the West, that they'll be reinvested to rebuild Ukraine under governance of the United States. The rest will be invested in the America-Russian investment instruments. In the altered version, Ukraine is getting compensation from Russian assets that will be under arrest until complete retribution is paid to Ukraine. And there are a couple more items that originally they were saying that American-Russian group will be created to discuss safety questions, and what turned into that Ukraine and the EU will participate in this discussion. And there was also a term that if Ukraine will invade Russia or shoot a missile at Moscow and St. Petersburg, the agreement will be annulled. This article was shrunk to the smaller version, but essentially if Ukraine does any provocation, the terms of this peace agreement are annulled. And also they changed the duration that initially it was a 100-day plan, and now the 19th article version supposedly promising a different duration, which will correspond with effort of both sides to resolve it. So yeah, one of the main differences in this thing is the way that money are spent, and original offer was that money would be transferred to Ukraine only partially out of these 300 billion. Europeans do not want to give these money to Americans for investments and payments and managing. Europe says that we have arrested these assets and we will not allow United States to now take ownership and take possession of this. And then, of course, another point is that, yes, we are for democracy, so we don't know the situation, how it will unfold in Ukraine, and if the elections were supposed to be conducted in the original plan within 100 days, the edited version now supposes that elections will be conducted as soon as possible, but without stating a certain number of days. So EU is holding a somewhat conservative position to make sure that they can protect the founding pillars of EU and do not have to violate them due to some haphazard action. And any attempt to change these pillars, it causes their surprise, saying that, listen, why are you trying to kick the pillars from ourselves? Because this is the founding documents or founding elements of EU. The position is understandable. The problem is that they have nothing to interfere or enforce these points with, these articles with. You're right, they will not go to fight for anything. They have about American parts in their arms and to about 60% of what they manufacture, so they cannot independently use them if the United States is in disagreement. And America did mention that if you guys are implementing a 19th package of sanctions against your enemy, that means that they probably don't work. And you can also understand that Ukrainian position is very stubborn. We understand that we have brigade officers and brigade generals who are responsible for the morale of the army. Of course, those women who root for Zelensky and all those bloggers in the pro-Zelensky sphere who've been promoting that position, and they cannot suddenly change it, with the very brief exceptions of those who try to write the truth. So those people who do not really participate in war, those who are not on the front line, those who are not in the houses that are being demolished, those are actually taking a very stubborn position. So same as Europeans who are saying, listen, we're taking a very reserved position, we're not going to surrender, we're going to stand and fight for our rights as EU and for future of Ukraine. So something like you were there crawling on your knees in the trenches, meantime we will honestly and boldly standing far away from the front and defending our freedoms. And if you suggest them, hey, why don't you go to the trench, they look at you as you're mad. So, Alexei, you're using such a formulation in our discussions as a central signal. Today, again, online, interparliamentary Crimea platform was being discussed, and people are bringing the statement made by Stefanchuk with this, that, look, the war will be over when Ukraine will bring Crimea back. That was a statement made by the Speaker of Ukrainian Congress, Rada, Stefanchuk. So, underlining that Ukraine will not sign anything without Ukrainian participation. We will decide the size of our army and our NATO participation. And he said that, yeah, we will conclude the war only when we get the Crimea back. Oh, I understand. That was the statement that made Umerov break his pen, because that's like the worst statement you can make to add to this position. Unbending position is the cheapest position you can take. It doesn't involve any calculus, any forecasting, any thinking. You can take the stubborn position and just stand there as that superhero, unwavering and unshaken. The irony of that is that it's a very cheap politics, such an unwavering position. Look, when Soviet Union was regulating the Afghanistan war in Geneva with Gorbachev, they were the ones who never agreed to any negotiations. But their refusal to negotiate was based on the circles in the West who were making money on the West, supplying mujahideen, and this was the group that figured out how to be participants in this pipeline who were making money on war. And we do have a group in Ukraine who is also making money on war. The arguments that you hear, they're not filled with anything. And the question they're most afraid of is, okay, what do you suggest instead? Because their suggestion would be to fight to the last Ukrainian. How can I answer this statement? When you have maybe 20 Ukrainian fighters fighting on the 10 kilometers of the front, you can go ask those fighters whether they want peace or not. I want to say that 75% of this unwavering posturing stands, on what? Those people usually wake up in Kyiv, in Toronto, or somewhere else in the States, in the world, in Europe. They look at the deep state map and they're saying that, if Russia is not there, we can be unwavering. The line is still there, the front is still there. And when you tell him, hey, why don't you come join this front to hold it, they get very upset because it's not my business. My business is to be unwavering. Now, if one day when the war will be changing, they will see red diamonds starting to move closer to Kyiv, I want to say that those 85% of those unwavering supporters will start running towards a peace deal as fast as they can. It'll probably bring the keys to the peace treaty to Russia with their pants down and ask for it. Because all these unwavering group is strong and loud because the front is holding, because somebody else is fighting for them, because it's still too far to Kyiv, to Lviv, to Vinnytsia. When the soldier is sitting in the trench and saying that, you know what, I'd rather die than let Russians in, that I can respect. That I can understand and deeply respect. Problem is, I don't know a single officer or soldier like that. But I know a lot of servicemen who observe those fleeing the front, tens of thousands of people who abandon their positions and nothing happens to them, who are dumbfounded by that bussification effort and the recruitment and the quality of people that are being brought to them as replenishment. 85% of them will flee even before they get to the front, and 12% will surrender the moment they see the enemy. Well, this is being popularized by a lot of pro-Zelensky patriots. Like, you are sitting at home, drinking, doing nothing, and here you're given a mission to fight for your country and maybe die for your country, and this is noble. And yeah, right, Alexander. And I want to continue here that the third thing is that the officers on the front see that these unwavering people do not give a chance for the military to survive, to remain alive, without even trying to fight themselves. So they understand, our officers and soldiers understand that these unwavering patriots are basically holding them hostage. And they're looking at that with, I'm picking words here, with some surprise. Unwavering is amazing when it comes from the line of people standing in the drafting commission. That I can understand. Those people who are standing there to fight for the country and saying that I think Russians should not be taking our land. I will go and prove with my blood and sweat I will never surrender. You have to respect this person. This person goes into eternity from here. But the ones who are waking up, checking deep state maps, having their coffees, and then laughing at funny Russian army that does nothing, that still cannot move, that they have not moved in over a year. And yeah, no, of course, we should not surrender. We never should surrender because the border doesn't move. The front border doesn't move. So we keep killing those Russians, and it's only the weaklings who will surrender. And would quote some Don Corleone statement from the popular movies. I would love to see those people in a trench and observe their unwavering position in the trench on the front line. I don't think you ever will, Alexei. Right, that's exactly my point, that these people will be as unwavering for as long as somebody is fighting for them on the front. And they don't even present their position in the nations much. Yeah, you know, Alexei, thanks to Elon Musk, with deep, deep gratitude, who opened in the accounts in his X, who is not just where they're territorially positioned, but who is using which service on their phone. And they see that Podolyak loaded X from some Russian software market. And all these patriots that you talked about, they're left and right, God knows where, in Canada, in Europe, and they continue fighting on that information front. Yeah, many people call this network after Musk's demarche today, not X, but H. So, and I want to send a note here that Mikhail Podolyak, to support him, that he is a brave intelligence officer, because when he was registering, you had to connect through certain Russian stores. I guess it's his intelligence cover. And real patriots, I would say, definitely connect through either Canadian or Russian servers to that, while such a traitor as myself, they always connect through Ukraine. Sarcasm here, of course. By the way, this was a picture that made circles last week. This was a cemetery in Lviv that ran out of spaces, but just it seems when it's completely full. Just 5 days later, we see the Minister of Defense Shmyhal who comes out and says that we are giving another hectare and a half on the cemetery, so you all can exhale, you all can leave content. We have more space to bury more people. Don't worry. Yeah. Okay, Alexei, today is somewhat a sad but mini date, notable date, 1,370 days. Of course, it's not 1,500, but I would prefer us not to hit the bigger dates on this war. Let's, however, take a look at the front. They were definitely news, as the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation is stating that they have taken them. That deep state map that you mentioned, it's lagging behind, it's still not showing it, but we can definitely observe that the fight is already inside Kostiantynivka. Situation in Pokrovsk was somewhat mentioned by Panko, by that storm trooper who is somewhat popular in the media, saying that we pushed Russians out, and Ukrainians in return from the front said, no, we actually have not pushed Russians there. So let's go through the front and look at these positions, because Kostiantynivka is a very important area on the front, talking about the Russian blitzkrieg to that township. Okay, if we start here in the middle, although I do usually prefer going north to south or south to north, we can start from Kostiantynivka. Nothing changed drastically. The key and most difficult and most dangerous direction right now is Zaporizhia. More precisely, Russian actions from the northeast flank, the ones that are attacking Pokrovsk, cutting the border of Dnipro district and going to Zaporizhia. So this is the most dangerous direction strategically for Ukraine, because it creates a significant threat to an industrial center in Zaporizhia industrial district, plus Dnipro. It's only about 80 kilometers to Dnipro from there, and this is the last significant industrial area close to the front line. And the presence of that front line so close to that defense manufacturing area is a potential catastrophe for our military production. Plus, there is energy power lines happening in the vicinity that will likely be attacked and disrupted. So, yeah, that's one of the most strategically dangerous area. As for Donbass, capture of Pokrovsk, Russians taking of Pokrovsk is just a matter of time. Given that it has not fallen yet, we probably still have reserves that are holding it. Yes, right here. And second, that if after capturing Pokrovsk, they go to Dobropolia, and then Barvinkova, it's about 60 kilometers. This is the last train station that is supplying our group in Donbass. And the third, if they take Kostiantynivka, they're creating that operative balcony to attack Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, and then Liman Forestry. They're creating that balcony down south that they can use to attack. They're creating conditions for the operation of capture of Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. Plus Siversk, there is additional motion in Siversk. They're already breaking through the line, and if they manage to exert additional pressure, they might actually push this group out that was unwavering and standing there since basically the beginning of war in 22. And if they manage to close this gap, they will free about 70 or 80,000 troops that are now dispersed through a longer front line, and then they'll be able to move them anywhere else on the front. Same thing will happen when they take Pokrovsk. The front will straighten up, and 2/3 of what they have there will be liberated to be used elsewhere. That's why pincers is such a advantageous way of conducting warfare, because it allows you to free a lot of troops if you're successfully concluding this maneuver that you can use to create new pincers elsewhere. And of course, we can talk about certain villages and other areas But in reality, this is micromanagement then. So I'd prefer to stay on a strategic level and strategic perspectives. The most dangerous is Zaporizhia, the loss of Kramatorsk and Slavyansk, and Kharkiv in the eastern part. These are potential dangerous points in the future. Those are the future perspectives. After Slavyansk and Kramatorsk falls, Kharkiv will be in danger. So Kupyansk group, are they done, or what's happening there? Because Putin already declared that they're successfully moving forward there. Our resources are very delicate with this direction and still holding. Yeah, we dropped some reserves to that part of the front. They produce sort of stabilizing effect. But the problem is that reserves are small and the stabilizing effect sooner or later will run out. So right now, Pokrovsk, Myrnohrad and Kupyansk are being fought for, but the perspectives in all of them is unfavorable for Ukraine, that we'll lose all of them, because we don't have reserves, that's it. Now, if we drop additional reserves, and if we find reserves to drop them and hold these townships, for example, in Pokrovsk, Dnipro and Zaporizhia operation, on that flank, starting from Donbass to Zaporizhia, that's about 170,000 troops. How many else do we drop there? 15, 20,000? That already allows us to hold it. That's why the big war is always the fight of reserves. The one who is more successful at developing these reserves, at growing them and dropping them in the difficult parts of the front, this is where a small country can win over the large country, if you are smart in doing that. But we have significant issue with reserves. Basically, we have none. And this is a key threat. When we run out of the last reserves that are still fighting for Pokrovsk and Kupyansk to hold the front, because due to these reserves, this is only because of them dying there right now, we, as a country, can posture, and Zelensky's office can say that, hey, we're still holding. And then little streams will connect into bigger rivers, and it'll be much more difficult to hold them. Alexei, right before our stream, we had another piece of information. Vice Commander, or second in command in the 3rd Storm Corps, who is writing that I cannot recall such a speed of enemy advancement. Hasn't been like that for a while. The front is not advancing on our side. The situation is only deteriorating, and very soon the situation will become critical. I cannot recall when was the last time we were losing territories so quickly, and right now the operative position of our enemy is getting better on the whole directions of the front. To confirm that he's using more tactical data, and this is Zhorin who is publishing it, I want to discuss another difficult topic with you. Russians' incursion to Kyiv, more and more it is being brought up in the media that now if we sign or not sign the treaty or these articles, we may be facing an opportunity to meet Russian tanks in Kyiv if we do not do that. How do you see? Will Russians try Kyiv campaign again? Could it be as a possibility? And when, from the military perspective, that would be possible? Well, listen, for that, they need to have significant reserves liberated from the current campaign. So if, for example, they take Pokrovsk and they get operative tactical reserves, if in some other area they succeed, for example, in Kupyansk, it's difficult to liberate any troops because they'll have to continue fighting going south to cut more standing troops and get another pincers. But if they manage to create another operative 150,000 group on the Kyiv direction, this would be just by itself, being, even if they don't cross the border from Belarus, that will be a significant factor on these negotiations. They could do it. Add panic, add political pressure. And if necessary, they could go for Kyiv as the last argument to break Ukrainian position on negotiations. Because if Kyiv is under surrender or under encirclement, that'll be a significant push to change Ukrainian position on these negotiations. So Istanbul, if you remember, started when the Kyiv was under siege in 22. Istanbul too can start when Kyiv is under siege again. That's a probability. Now, I could say that that's what I would do in their place, but this phrase would significantly upset our viewers, although I would say this is reasonable and rational action if that happens, because then many of our people would discover that Russians can actually be reasonable, and apparently it is being a traitor to Ukrainian people if you say it like this. That's why I would say a different formulation here. This is probable. This is possible, because if I was in the place of Russians, that looks like a rational act. And in some conditions, it becomes a very significant option for them to use in order to achieve certain success in negotiations. So yes, this is possible, maybe February or somewhere. Especially if the data that the West is operating in the West, I think that Russia is approaching default, that the economy in Russia is difficult. So understanding that Putin perhaps will not be able to continue waging this war on a large scale, he can concentrate his troops for the last resulting attack near Kyiv. And again, what do you use to defend Kyiv with? Because our brave reserves, the last one of them, are still fighting for Pokrovsk and Kupyansk. So defense of Kyiv will be a significant question mark. End of the first hour.